One of the great albums of the English folk period of the 1970s is I Want to See the Bright Lights Tonight by Richard and Linda Thompson. It's a record that really shows the depth of musical chemistry between Richard and Linda, successfully mixing various genres like British folk rock, Celtic jig, and even hinting at styles like ragga. Let's take a closer look at this record and break down what makes it such a lasting, interesting album to listen to today. In 1967, Richard Thompson had formed the band Fairport Convention. Their exceptional musicianship and arrangements made British music much more vibrant at a time when the centre of gravity was with the American-influenced blues rock scene. These were bands like Jefferson Airplane and the Byrds, as well as solo performers like Joni Mitchell and Bob Dylan. Key to Fairport Convention's folksy sound was Richard Thompson's spindly, trembling electric guitar lines that mixed with the rest of the group's more traditional folk instrumentation to create something that at the time felt genuinely new. A lot of the band's early records were full of these interesting guitar moments. Take, for example, A Sailor's Life, the centerpiece of the band's third album. By 1970, however, despite a successful and well-received run of albums, the group were hemorrhaging band members. Essentially, much of the band couldn't agree on where to go next. Some, like Richard Thompson, wanted to push the band's sound further into more electric spaces, whilst others wanted to hark back to the familiar folky scene from where the band had first cut their teeth. And to add to the uncertainty, in 1969, the band's van had been involved in a severe car crash on the way home from a gig in Birmingham. The band's drummer, Martin Lamble, was killed at the young age of 19, and so was Jeannie Franklin, Richard Thompson's girlfriend at the time. The clouds were darkening, and as a result, Thompson decided to leave the band to focus on his own solo material. In an interview recorded in 2024, Thompson said of the time, "Not all decisions were rational. I think my decision to leave Fairport wasn't necessarily rational, but it was a gut feeling. I was just really tired and burnt out. I thought it was time for a rest. I wanted to concentrate on writing." Richard's resultant first outing as a solo artist, 1972's Henry the Human Fly, continued in the same vein of folk rock that Thompson had made his signature with his former band, but at this record's heart was a sense of distress and disillusionment that you can hear in songs like Twisted, the album's closing track.
Go for help if I could find the way I came in. I'm feeling clover, it's time to keel over. Something tells me I'm twisted.
Henry the Human Fly was an eccentric oddity of a record with a dark, stony heart, and it didn't sell well. At one point, it was even rumoured to have been the worst-selling album in the Warner Brothers back catalogue. Things seemed a little in the balance for Thompson, but perhaps that uncertainty created its own opportunity. Thompson felt a newly unshackled sense of artistic freedom, given he was no longer tethered to his previous band and bandmates. And what's more, Thompson was in the midst of a new romance with a girl called Linda Peters, who he had met a few years previous. In his memoir, Beeswing, released in 2021, Thompson details his first encounter with a woman who would soon go on to be his wife. He recalls, "I first met Linda Peters at Sound Techniques on the Legion Leaf sessions, and we sat next to each other in the restaurant when the gang went out for dinner on the King's Road afterwards. I thought she was pretty cute, dark-haired with strong cheekbones, shapely and dressed in a miniskirt with thigh-length boots. By 1971, we were going out. She was far more worldly and experienced than me, and I once again felt that in most ways, except musically, I was the junior partner in our relationship. I didn't mind that. I was flattered that she liked me enough to date me." Despite Richard Thompson thinking he was the junior partner in this new relationship, the romantic entanglement led to a greater wellspring of new songwriting. One of the great unusual and unconventional ways that Richard Thompson approached songwriting on what would become his second record was to come up with the song titles first. This was an idea that he had first encountered whilst reading the book Bound for Glory by the great American folk pioneer Woody Guthrie. Richard and Linda were soon married, and the two decided to approach these song titles together, with Richard taking the lead writing the lyrics to the songs. Now, despite Richard having a few years out from his previous band, and despite his new marriage, the lyrics that he was writing still seemed to speak of an inner disenchantment. Take the album opener, When I Get to the Border. The song has a rocky, triumphant feel and feels made for sing-alongs in beer-soaked pub rooms, but it is essentially a song about escaping your troubles.
One way tickets in my hand, heading for the chosen land. My troubles will all turn to sand when I get to the bar.
It's difficult to pin down exactly what the Thompsons were trying to so desperately escape here, but there's no doubt that the pace of the previous years in Britain's buzziest band had taken a toll on Richard in particular. And after the band's car crash, the spectre of death and friends lost was probably on the minds of the newlywed pair too. Richard in particular had experienced considerable loss, losing his previous girlfriend and his bandmate. The British folk scene generally seemed a bit cursed. Nick Drake, who was part of that folk scene and close socially to the band, and who would of course go on to be this talismanic figure of the scene many decades later, would soon pass on. And Sandy Denny, the former singer of Fairport Convention, would only be a few years behind. Perhaps the Thompsons felt haunted way beyond their years, and it meant that this new set of songs seemed written from a sense of closing in mortality. You can hear that clearly on the song Withered and Died, a song sung by Linda, but ultimately reflecting the sense of resignation felt by the song's author, Richard.
This cruel country has driven me down. Tease me right, tease me right.
There is no sense of irony or humour here. It just feels like a sad, solemn song, the sonic equivalent of the last miserable warm dregs of a solitary pint in the early hours of the morning when the barroom is emptied. It's quite easy to forget that when the Thompsons recorded this album, they were still firmly in their 20s. But the sense of gloominess in this album's lyrics suggests both the Thompsons being much older than their young years, a sense of lives lived fast and hard. Withered and Died's sense of resignation is only matched by the album's penultimate song, The End of the Rainbow. In that song, Thompson imagines himself singing a kind of dark lullaby to a child, where he seems to insist that there is nothing in this life worth sticking around for.
There's nothing but the end of the rainbow. There's nothing to grow up for anymore.
To me, The End of the Rainbow is such a deeply despairing, nihilistic song, perhaps one of the bleakest songs off the period. When Richard Thompson wrote it, he said that he had in mind a song by Cilla Black called Liverpool Lullaby, which in itself was an interpolation of a traditional folk song called the Sandgate Dandling Song. In Cilla Black's version of the song, she sings to an imagined wayward child, menacingly warning of the consequences of their actions.
Oh, you are a mucky kid, dirty as a dustbin lid. When he hears the things that you did, you'll get a belt from your dad.
The End of the Rainbow has the kind of quality of a darkly beguiling lullaby. The thing is, despite the lyrical matter, this album never feels like a miserable listen. And I think a lot of that has to do with the pretty instrumentation. At the end of the song, When I Get to the Border, for example, there is a kind of back and forth conversation between various instruments, typically the kind you would hear in traditional folk songs. Dulcimer, mandolin, penny whistle, and even 2 crumb horns, a reed instrument that dates back to the 16th century, all vie one by one for the listener's attention. For the song, the Thompsons recruited 2 players from the band Griffin, a curious band who wrote in the style of medieval and Renaissance music. That band's sound was not only influenced by traditional music, but seemed to harken back to it entirely. By inserting more traditional instruments and sounds like this onto the record, and often alongside more contemporary electrified instruments, the Thompsons seem to be signalling how both modern and antique music could fit together in harmony. There didn't have to be a divide, or a notion that their more contemporary leanings were trampling underfoot the scene's folksier roots. As a clear example of this approach, on the album's title track, the Thompsons employed the sound of a Manchester brass band to add a bouncier feel to a song that was ultimately about weekend decadence.
There's crazy people running all over town. There's a silver band just marching up and down.
Richard Thompson had always been enchanted by the sounds of traditional English folk music, and his weaving of traditional and modern instrumentation on this set of songs created a kind of sonic symbiosis whereby each layer of sound lifted the other. On the song The Calvary Cross, which begins with a guitar line indebted to the microtones of Indian devotional music, Richard Thompson sings of an eerie, pale-faced lady that seems to command the song's protagonist.
Pale-faced lady, she said to me, I watch you with my one green eye. I'll hurt you till you need me.
Thompson has said that this song is about the concept of the muse and divine inspiration. It's a song that gives an indicator of where he would go next in his own personal journey of spirituality. Thompson would soon discover Sufism and devote the rest of his life to this mystical form of Islam. And on the 1975 album Pour Down Like Silver, that devotion to Sufism would become most apparent, with Thompson appearing on the record's cover wearing a turban. The Thompsons would also spend the next 3 years in dedicated Islamic communities within England, going deeper into the faith as they navigated their place within the wider world. Indeed, despite all the disillusionment on I Want to See the Bright Lights Tonight, it seems to be the recurring motif of faith, and religious faith in particular, that ushers the Thompsons onwards. Sometimes that's explicit, such as on the exultant song We Sing Hallelujah.
And we sing hallelujah, the turning of the year, and we work all day in the old-fashioned way to a shining star appear.
On the album's final song, The Great Valerio, that imagery of faith occurs again. When writing this song, Richard Thompson has said he paid a visit to the Glasgow Art Museum, where he saw a painting depicting the daredevil French tightrope walker, Charles Blondin, traversing the Niagara Falls Gorge. Thompson reimagined someone like Blondin as a great spiritual teacher, imagining the brave act of faith that such an individual would need to take, keeping steady in their personal journey of belief with the temptation of the modern world below.
The rope seems hung from cloud to cloud, and time stands still while he is walking, his eyes steady on the target.
At the end of the song, the Thompsons interpolate a piece of music by the French composer Erik Satie. It's an interesting end to the album, bestowing it with a sense of unresolved tension, perhaps reflecting the juxtaposition of uncertainty, heaviness, and subsequent wrestling with faith that the Thompsons were facing at this time point in their lives, whilst backed by the festive traditional sounds of folk music that the pair loved so much. I Want to See the Bright Lights Tonight captures Richard and Linda Thompson in their finest form. However, the newlywed chemistry that endows these songs with so much life soon gave way to marital tensions. Richard and Linda stumbled on and released 5 more records together, ending with 1982's Shoot Out the Lights. That album's title seemed to directly correspond to I Want to See the Bright Lights Tonight, finally calling time on Richard and Linda's musical and romantic affair. Though the two have collaborated since, nothing captures this musical partnership better than I Want to See the Bright Lights Tonight. It is one of the essential British folk albums of the 1970s, a churning mix of resignation and a longing for escape, but against all odds, a meditation on faith and belief too. If you enjoyed this breakdown, you can also see my dissection of the making of John Martyn's Solid Air on my channel, in my view one of the other great albums of the period. You can see that documentary here. Thanks for watching, and let me know which album you want me to look at next. As ever, catch you in the next video.